Today, we're delving into the interplay between product development and product market fit. Ever met a founder who built an incredible technical product, but no one wanted it? What's more important, brilliance in design or relevance in the market? Throughout this series, you've heard about the importance of product market fit to sales success. And today, we want to take a look at how it should inform the product development process. Today, we have with us Hamed Ghajarnia, who runs the product development firm Crinac, and Steve Davis, a senior commercialisation consultant with us here at Advivo ICP, who will be co-hosting that Product Market Fit Guide podcast with Linda and myself. Steve has been involved in product development and commercialisation of new technologies through both his own ventures and in advisories to others. Steve has learnt firsthand the need to interplay between product market fit and product development and will co-host this episode. Don't forget to hit the subscribe so that you can keep up with all the topics product market fit, and stick around to the end because we will wrap up with the 5 key learnings of how you build both brilliant and relevant to market products. Let's go. Welcome, Steve, and welcome back, Hamed. Thank you for coming along to the podcast again.
Oh, thanks, Trevor. Great to be here.
Thank you, Trevor. Yes, it's amazing to be with you.
Excellent. Well, Steve, I'm going to throw it over to you, and I want to start with, given all your years of consulting in this space, how many times have you heard the phrase, build it and they will come? And what's your experience of this as a success strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, look, I've heard it quite a lot of times. I'm sure a lot of us have. It doesn't work very well as a strategy, which we'll go through in a minute as to why. But let me start from, I got into this quite early on. One of the first places I worked for after sort of graduating from university was in the UK.
Yeah.
And this is a company that designs and manufactures mass spectrometers. Now, a lot of you may not know what a mass spectrometer is, but it's a high-end scientific instrument that analyzes molecules at a very, very low level. So they can use them to identify unknown compounds and even for quality control to work out what's in there to what level for various analysis purposes. So it's got a huge range of applications, almost anything you can think of, from science to industrial applications, medicine, environmental monitoring, forensics, and the list goes on and on. So there's a huge number of applications. So this is a good example as well of a very broad market.
Yes.
And as you'll have heard in this podcast series, how do you break markets down and work out segments of that where you might fit best? So this is a good example in that sense as well. But the company I went to work for in Manchester in the UK was actually a company that was the first commercial manufacturer of a mass spectrometer. So these guys kind of almost invented it, as it were. And these are very complex instruments, but it was obviously run and still was run when I went there by engineers, the guys that invented these things. It was incredible engineering, but they were all focused on how well it performed. It had to be the best in the market from performance-wise. And of course, that works for some customers and still does to this day. But when I joined there was another company also in the same city over there in the UK, which had come along quite a few years before, had spun off, and they had just had a totally different approach, and they were very market-led. They focused on application needs, specifics, and actually built products that solved a problem. Okay, yes, they were still accurate. They weren't necessarily super accurate, but it was accurate enough to do the job. What was the job it had to do? It had to identify the compounds. And what they were more focused on was they talked to the market, and what customers actually wanted was, yes, of course, they needed performance, but what they were interested in was automated data processing, automated reporting, make their lives easier kind of thing. It wasn't just about that absolute result coming out of the machine. It was, what do you do with it? How do you make my life easier to make the rest of my job work? And so they were a very applications-driven company. They focused on stuff. They picked segments of the market initially, owned those segments, and just went on to become so much more dominant than the company I originally went to work for those reasons. So that's sort of an example that I sort of walked straight into in the early part of my career. So the engineers really did think, build it and they'll come. And a few people did, but not that many compared to what you did if you did it a different way and looked for product market fit.
What a great example to kick it off. That's fantastic, Steve. Now, Hamed, I bet you've heard that saying as well. Have you come across that and you got an example?
Certainly. I just want to go back a little, one step before. We have discussed this before that whenever someone come into uh, an idea of a new product that they want to develop, it might comes from your personal experience, something that you work and you find out, all right, I need to, or I can make it better, I can improve this product, or there are problems that I want to fix. But one thing that I see a lot of people don't realize that they need to check and make sure that this problem that they want to solve is actually not just their own problem, too many other people's problem too. Because you don't want to give a solution to a problem that you think is a big problem and then find out that this is not a real problem for too many people. I had an experience with one company or one founder before that they came to us and said, we want to develop a bottle that has, a sort of a different level of filtration and of course finding out the bacteria in the water and cleaning out. So they sort of want to have a small lab and on top of the bottle. And their idea was that if you go out in the wild, in the woods, and came across a water that you wanted to use and you don't know if it's a healthy one or not, then you can actually put it in the water and make sure that you have a water which is clean. Yeah, technically when you look into it, yeah, it makes sense, good. But then we had a bit of discussion that who you actually developing this one for, because our argument was that, okay, at least in Australia, wherever you go, you either carry the water with you, or most of the places you go, there's a good water that you can use. So that's not a big problem here.
Yeah.
But there are some other countries that maybe you go there and there's no good, healthy water available, or there are, for example, areas that is vast, and then you go there and want to use a spring or a river or some other thing, and you don't know you wanted to use it. So that is not a problem of someone normally here live in Australia. That might be a problem someone else's lives in some other countries, for example. And then let's say that, for people in Africa that you want to develop this product, if they, are they able to pay for it?
Yes. Yes.
And if you want to sell to them, are they going to buy it themselves, or some other companies or authorities like UN might buy it and give it to these guys?
Yeah.
So that changed the whole approach in terms of the development. And
Brilliant.
these guys had no idea.
What a
Yeah.
terrific example of a solution, that can be done technically, but making sure you're actually finding the right market. I love that one, Hamed. I guess so. We're all in agreement that innovators need to focus not on build it and they will come, but on things like, well, what is the job to be done, and understanding what are those key jobs that the customers are not satisfied with, and then also the market segments, which you've just given us a fantastic example of, Hamed. So yeah, making sure to just set those minimum standard features that warrant the customer to actually purchase it and be able to afford it. Otherwise, find different markets. That's great. Good introduction, guys.
Hey, Trevor, there's another one too that everyone might be a bit more familiar with in general, other than some of the ones that Hamed and I have already mentioned. And that's, everybody remember the Segway that came out sort of about 2001?
Yes.
This thing came out, great piece of engineering, a self-balancing personal transporter that was going to transform urban mobility, right?
Yes.
Huge amount of hype, even to the point where Steve Jobs predicted cities would redesign themselves to cope with these things. And how often do you see one now? not very
Not
often,
very
because
often.
there wasn't
Yeah.
really a market demand. From the price point was way out of whack. It was like 5,000 or 6,000 US or something like this. There were all sorts of regulatory restrictions, so they weren't even legal on the streets and things anyway. So
Yeah.
another perfect example of a beautiful piece of engineering. Build it and they'll come, but hey, guess what? It didn't really fit. There was no market pull for it, no need for it.
Yeah. Classic. That's a good example too.
I want to add another ones to this game too. There was another product called Juicero. So actually, when you look into the product, it was a really nice piece of engineering. Looks great, works perfect, and you had a pouch of juice, and you put it inside the machine, and it just give you a juice. It's the point is you could actually squeeze it by your hand too. So
Yeah.
why you need a juice machine to do it? And for $700, and it only worked if there is an internet connection.
Oh, right.
So, when you look into the engineering of it, that's an amazing product.
Yeah.
But why do people need it?
Yes. It's a great question. And I know all of us here, every time someone comes with an idea, one of the very first questions we ask is, who do you think is going to buy this? So, yeah, that's a great intro, guys.
Hamed, yeah, just interested in knowing your thoughts on how, talking to the market and getting feedback informs defining a minimal viable product, because that then sort of sets some boundary conditions for you guys to actually design around. So as designers, you guys can design anything, right? But you've got to have some sort of conditions around what you're trying to do and constraints on what you're doing. For example, the cost targets. There's no point designing something that's going to cost $10,000 if it's got to sell for $200, for example, or it's got to comply with certain regulations, safety standards, visibility, all sorts of things. So it can be a very informative process to, as I say, set the boundary conditions of how you then operate your design process within those boundary conditions. Do you see it that way? Have you used it in that way before in terms of designing products?
Yes, certainly. That's definitely, it's a very important part of our process. So we, as you said, we can design basically anything for any customer and any market, but it's very important to realize what is important for that customer, especially for those early adopters, because you might be able to sell to a lot of people in the future, but not everyone's going to buy the product first. So I need to really find out who's going to buy those products at the start, because those guys basically has different requirement, has different reason to buy your product, and certainly knowing it will help us to understand what are the initial features of the product we need to design for. And then later on, if you want to, of course, expand your market and then adding more features or improvements to the product, that is fine. But that early MVP is the best things to get to the market, have some revenue, some feedback. And for that, knowing the market is really the key, because you wanted to make sure that, you're spending on that limited resources that you have to get you to the point that the product is ready to enter to the market. There are some products that, as you mentioned, requires specific regulations to pass. One example was that, we are working on some agricultural product for controlling the animals. So those ones, it's important to understand if, for example, you only want to geolocate the animal, or only wants to look into the health of the animal in terms of using some sensors to look into the, for example, cattle health, or the location, or the movements, or virtual fencing, and lots of other features that the people look into the agricultural product like that. And each of them has their own requirements in terms of a design, but not all of it requires, but all the companies or all the people. So knowing it help us to define the product in a right way, and of course, all the testing that requires for whatever market. So if you want to launch the product in Australia or New Zealand, is different to when you launch it for the US market or the Europe or any other countries. You need to know those, because that's define what you need to consider in your design. And testing that is requires for passing the product and get it ready to the market. If it's a medical device, you need to know what category is that device is, because that requires a completely different set of regulations that you need to pass. So all those information comes from the market and from your early customers that define what you require in the development of the product.
Yeah, you used the word early adopter there, Hamed. So that, I think that's important, that we've got to get in front of those people, and that sort of leads us into the concept that you will have heard from Trevor before about early adopter programs, right, Trevor?
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very valuable. But I'd love to hear from you, Hamed, about how do you use those programs to make sure the product is ready for market entry?
Any of these information come from these early adopters certainly is really, really valuable, because as we discussed, those are going to be your early users of the product. So you will get some feedback from them, as in how the product work and how the product going to perform, and the feedbacks of what is wrong, what is not working. You will get some information from them, as in if they love it or not, because they are not just the customers. They can be your ambassadors of the product into a wider range of the market. So knowing those information and getting those testing and feedback from them is really, really valuable and help us into improving the product, early design of the product, and of course, all the improvements and later versions of the product that we wanted to add for the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another good example of how an early adopter program might have changed how a product was actually, or did change how it was launched, and again, one which most of the listeners may be familiar with is, remember the Peloton exercise bike that you see
Yes.
advertised quite a bit? They ran an early adopter program by putting it in, because it's meant to be a home exercise bike, right? So they ran an early adopter program where they put it into private homes to see what sort of feedback they'd get. And the feedback they got was that it was actually felt quite sterile and lonely actually using the thing. So,
Ah,
it did the functional job of providing a workout, but the other job it was doing was you needed to inspire people to get in and actually do this exercise and have some desire to get in and do it, right? Not just the fact it was an exercise bike. So what they ended up doing, as you probably all well know, is they then had put on a real sort of interface to it with leaderboards and competitions and live
yes.
instructors and all this kind of stuff. So there was a real sort of interactive community type feel to it. So you're in your own home, but you felt like you weren't because of this interface they put on with it. And that turned out to be the huge differentiator for Peloton over other exercise bikes. It was all about this front end and user interface and what the market actually wanted to actually
So,
drive the.
so in that situation, Steve, they got the functional job right first, but then they discovered there was also emotional and
Correct.
social jobs there that people were looking
Absolutely.
for.
Correct.
What a brilliant
Yeah.
example.
So it's definitely it's a must to do an early adopter program. The feedback that you'll get from that is invaluable, and it can stop you going down a rabbit hole. And it has done on many, many occasions.
Yeah, fantastic. So on that, Steve, I guess that there's a few other stories around early adopter programs. I'll open it up to both of you. Have there been ones where you've actually learnt through the early adopter program the impact of the design and maybe save the project before it went to market?
Sure. I want to give you one example of our own direct experience, basically. There was a product that we were working, and there was like a small containers, and the idea earlier was that it should be tamper-proof, and that was designed for transport of highly sensitive or sometimes dangerous medicines. So if you want to, for example, send some medicines from a chemist to, or doctor or hospital to a special patient, and that's especially required as special containers to have, for example, cooling system in it, or you want to have tracking to make sure that it's not end up somewhere else that's you don't need. The design was that we make a container that's had GPS tracking, so if you sell it, so send it by courier or someone, you actually know where it's received. When it's received by a specific customer, they will send a code to you that it is received, and you can actually send back a code that you can actually enter it, and you open up that container, and of course access to the medicine. So that was very secure in that sort of process. But then during that early adopter program, then we found out that is not necessarily the case, because the chemist or the hospitals, they actually have special couriers that they wanted to use to sending this one, and this container needs to fit in their own in that courier system.
Of course.
Because otherwise, if you don't adopt it, for example, if you use, I don't know, any of these normal couriers that you want, this integration was the key to be able to actually sell it, because those guys using those specific clients and couriers. So knowing that will actually change the whole interface of the product. that we wanted to
Yes.
use for the clients. So these sort of examples tell you some things that you don't know before entering into these early adopter programs, which is or can be completely a key in designing the product that has success in the market.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I can tell you another example where they've actually an early adopter program actually killed off the whole idea of where they were going to launch this thing, and they had to completely pivot another direction. It was a client that had some sophisticated sort of image recognition type software they'd developed, and so their original thought was, they were going to use it. This is going back quite a few years now, before this stuff became quite so run of the mill. But they were going to use it to sort of identify, face recognition in photos, or start tagging photos and things which get done regularly all the time now. But back then it was kind of just emerging, but there were already things starting to do it. And when they did test the market, it was like, well, there wasn't any real differentiator, real selling point here as to why they'd buy this over anything else that was already out there. It was already functioning well enough in other products. So that meant they had to completely pivot, because they just weren't going to succeed in that market at all. And they ended up discovering that where they could apply it was to identifying logos and images in trademark searches. So the actual image searches for logos and things, where they actually refined it even further to specialize in that area. And it ended up getting taken up by some of the really big patent searching, trademark searching companies in the end. So it was a totally different, same technology, but it was a totally different market application that they discovered through testing the market. The market said, no, we don't really need it that way. But they then discovered another one where they could pivot and actually enter a totally different market and succeed.
Brilliant. That's
All
good
right.
one, Steve.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. It's been a very useful discussion. So to summarize for the people listening, we can probably sum up the key learnings as build it and they will come is probably about the fastest way to fail at the end of the day, when all said and done. You should focus on what jobs the target market are trying to get done, not what you think they should be, and why they're frustrated with not being able to do that job now, and which market segment has the most pain. There's no point in having the shotgun approach. You need to get the rifle approach and figure out where it's going to have the most value and shoot for that one.
That's it.
Hamed's critical point about cost targets, regulations, safety, etc., providing boundaries that you must design within. Otherwise, it's just not going to sell at the end of the day if you don't meet those requirements. We should use the design process as a means to build the most viable, minimum viable product, and test that with an early adopter program and learn from it. That's the key thing. Learn from what they're saying and react to it. Pivot if you have to, but certainly focus down on the things that are of most value to them. Is probably the summary I think where we're at today.
Yeah, it's. I love that saying that Linda uses. Is just treat innovation like a scientific experiment, and if you've got that mindset all the way through, getting that early qualitative research and then building minimum viable product and into the early adopter program, and you learn things like you guys have discussed different projects there. So that's a great summary, Steve. What do you think, Hamed?
Yeah, you save a lot of time and money if you do it this way. It's if you go the wrong direction, it can be company ending basically if you go too far the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly, that's definitely the very important point.
Very good. Yeah. Well, Hamed and Steve, well, guys, that's been a pretty powerful conversation and a great reminder that innovation isn't about just building more features. It's about building the right features that solve real jobs for real people. And I think if we can get that through to people, then it's going to make a lot of difference to the success rates. So if you are developing a product right now, take this to heart. Start with the market, not the machine. Define the job, not the gadget, and build the minimum that matters, because that's where true product market fit begins. So to our viewers, if you've got questions for either Hamed or Steve, feel free to drop your questions in the comments section, and I'll put both their LinkedIn profiles in the description below if you want to reach out to either or both. So if you've found today's episode valuable, don't forget to hit subscribe, share it with a founder or innovator who needs to hear this, and drop any thoughts you have in the comments. Now, to Steve, looking forward to you hosting more episodes in the future, and I can foresee that we're probably going to have Hamed back on quite a few times, Steve.
Yeah, no, looking forward to it, Trevor. I look forward to the next topic we can do together.
Excellent. And Hamed, We always appreciate you giving up your time from your busy schedule at Crinac to help us get this important message out to viewers.
It's my pleasure.
So, to all of you, hope you've got a lot out of today. There's some great tips there from experts. Thank you all for watching. Until the next episode, ciao for now.